All right, we're back. So I had a question about transferring data between forms. And I was going to do a board example, but instead of doing a board example, and I apologize for sitting down, but I got to do this way. Instead of doing a board example, I'm going to use a bit of just another, I'll use Sketchbook Pro for this, right? Just so this is my board. So it's my whiteboard. So I want you to think about this. When you have a form, and again, forgive me with my drawing, but let's say, for example, we have a form. I'm just drawing on the board, right? So here's my first form. What I want to do with it, I want to go to the next form, right? And this is the problem that some people are having. So I want to take this, the data, here's my data, and I want to put this into the next form. If I do this directly, right, what's going to happen? What's the bad thing about doing this? I could basically take different fields. Let's say here are the fields inside of one form, and then I could just push them to fields in the other form, right? So here's some fields in the other form, and I could push these directly over, right? I could do that like this. What's the bad thing about doing that? Anybody? Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Yes? Yeah, right? So if I went back, now if I go back, this form is done, right? So I got nothing. And that's a negative thing. I don't want that to happen, right? So that's not really the great solution, right? What I want to do instead of that, and that was a really big eraser for some reason, but what I want to do instead is I want to take my data and I want to put it into this intermediary class, which is a container, right? So here's my container class. It's not a form, but it actually holds all the properties of the data that I'm getting over here, right? So I go to my class, and then from here, when I go across this way, it's going to read from the data from my class, the object that I've created, and pump it into this next form that I'm going to put over here, right? So here's the next form that's going to come here. So I can still traverse this way, right? And I create this form. This form is created from this form. This form is an object that gets created. But my data is stored. As soon as I leave this form, my data is created. This data stays, right? So now if I go back to this way, even though this form is destroyed, my data is still there, right? That's the thing I'm trying to tell you guys to do more often than not. And that's the way we're going to do it for every other thing that we do, right? If you're not doing it in this method, right? And if you're just pushing it directly to the form or some other thing, like using an array or some other kind of structure, it's too volatile, right? Of course, the other option would be, and we're going to talk about this next week, is you could push it somewhere onto a flat file. So here's a flat file somewhere, right? So here's a file, right? And then here is some kind of class, right, of an object. So here's a class, and here's a file. You could push it to a flat file, and then it'd be the same thing. The flat file would be read when you go to this new form. That's another way to do it, instead of pushing it to a class. Either way, however you do it, it's got to be a temporary container that you use, so that way when you go back and forth between forms, you don't lose your data, right? Otherwise, you risk data loss. Just saying, right? Of course, the other one is, instead of a file, push it to a database. So as soon as you leave from this form to this form, you have another table, let's say some kind of database transaction table. It's a temporary, a table that you use for temporary transactions, almost like a log. And you fill that table up with some data when you move from this form to this form. That's another option. However you do it, whether it's an object in a class, a flat file, or a database, you need to store your stuff temporarily before you move to the other form, or else you risk data loss when you come back, if you have that kind of relationship between forms. And especially when you have this scenario. So I have one form, and now I'm going to this one, right? And I want to be able to traverse back and forth. I'm still going to access this class, right? I still want to kind of save my stuff up here over and over again. And even if I go down the line, so as I move this way, or if I come back, right? If I have an application that allows me to do something like this, I still want to save everything back over here. Either way, I still want to save stuff into my form or my file or whatever it's going to be, right? Or both, right? Before, so that way it's not volatile. The information is still there. Otherwise, you could really frustrate a user, right? You go back and forth and this stuff is cleared. You ever do that on the web? You ever go there and you go back and it's gone? That's a pain in the ass, right? That's a horrible application structure. So that's why we do it this way. Any questions around this? Just wanted to answer your question, Gabe. I don't know if that answered your question. How do you do it? Okay. Well, no, it's not. What I mean is the class itself generates an object, right? So you create an object of that class. And you would do that here in your program.cs. So you're in your, before you big cloud that I'm drawing, right? This is your application. Outside of your application, you have this program, start your installation, right? This program.cs file, forgive me for trying to draw. I'm looking up and drawing down. It's really hard, right? But this is your program.cs file. Your program.cs file is gonna create an object of type class, right? And this object of type class, like we did with character, is available as a program.character, right? So the same thing. Now this, you're going to define it in your program, moving from one form to the other. But this class is going to be a construct that's already have been created, and it's available throughout your code, right? Did you not remember the example we did for character class? I don't mind doing this. If it's a problem, I will do it. But you know, the reason why is, is anyone else not understand this? Because if someone else doesn't understand this structure, then I think we really need to talk about this, because it's going to hit you on an exam over and over again, right? And that's the worst thing for me, to try and get you guys to do something that you don't know how to do because I haven't shown you enough. All right. Actually, I'll come back to this. I'll save this. She's too. You know what? Sometimes, you know, there's certain people. I'm a martial artist, and certain people I want to put in a headlock. But anyways, yes, there's only one more exam. Okay, only one. But still, what if you don't know how to do this? And that would be bad. Now, it wouldn't. Of course, it wouldn't wreck you on an exam. But I'm just saying. So let's take a look at how to do this. If I was going to do this on this kind of thing. Notice how we only have one form in this example, right? Have a first name, last name, program, and description. Well, this comes from my model class, right? In this particular case, this is my class, my model class, right? So student is actually the class that I'm talking about, right? So if I want to save my data and I want to port it from one form to the other, right? Whatever, depending on what student I selected, to do an assignment number. Let's restructure this thing just to answer your question, and maybe I can use it to demonstrate what I want to do anyway, so to speak, okay? So we know that the list form, this one, is pretty useless, right? Because it doesn't do anything for us. So I'm going to just trounce it. So I'm going to go in here and get rid of list form. And we're going to call this one my list form. Instead of list form 2, we'll just rename it. It's off before we do that, or else they're gonna complain. So I'll just close all these off. Actually, this one. Okay, so we're just gonna call this list form, and we'll call this student list form, just like the other one was called. So student list form. Hey, yes, I do want to rename. All right, so my student list is right now. If I double click on it, I have something that went wrong. All right. Something very bad happened, but I don't know how it happened, but it did happen. Did it completely kill everything I did? It did not. Somehow, it doesn't have a data grid view on my form. That's interesting. I've never had that happen to me. Please, no data grid view. And I'm wondering what happened with my designer. Maybe that happened. So I want to see if they have that here. It's very interesting. Student, yeah, it's here. It's listed. Look. How about if I run it? Does it show up? Value does not fall within expected range. A bit of an issue, huh? Oh, no, this isn't your world, Gabriel. This is get this form again over and over again, right? I can do this 10 times and I wouldn't be sad for it, right? I'm not worried about it. There it is. So if I run this thing now, it should run my list form 2, which is my student list form. Let's just rename this thing under properties. I wanted to do properties this way. And we name this thing. Instead of list form 2 is student list form. Student list. There it is. Right? And this should be called student. This is, the name is list form 2, right? Which is kind of weird that it did that and it didn't rename everything. That is scary. Student list form, but anyways. I love when it does this. This is pretty awesome. When I see this kind of stuff happening with my Visual Studio, I'm afraid. It means it's going to shut down or something else, right? It's almost like getting a beach ball on the Mac, right, when I get this stuff happening. So let's just wait for a second. But what I really need to do is rename this thing list form, student list form. Because that's what I did over here, right? Form, but somehow the name of the form inside my properties didn't rename, which is kind of weird because it would have. La la la. And you know what, Gabriel, I'm gonna have to make another one just for you if it craps up. Oh, I don't know what happened there, why it did what it did, but that shouldn't say list form 2, it should say student list form. That. Oh well, let's just fix it. So otherwise we'll have a big problem. So again, here's my properties for my list form. And what I want to go to call this is student list form on the top. Student GitHub list form. There. Properties window, property value is not valid. Okay. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to save all and close my solution. Start, yeah. Restart Visual Studio, and hopefully that'll fix my issue. Although I have a very bad feeling about this, just like Han Solo, right? Excuse me. Let's just make another one. Copy the code. So here's my Solution Explorer. I'll rename this thing to, here, let's get rid of my properties. Keep just for something else, but I'll rename this to something else. I'll rename it to A. There we go. Something else. I'm going to get rid of this in a second. All right. And let's make another one. So I'm going to right-click just to fix my problem. Add. And we're going to go to Windows Form. And we're going to click this on, and we're going to make this, we're going to call it what we want to call it, which is student list form. Student. There we go. Student list form. Yay. Okay. What we want to do is we want to drag and drop. This is a really kind of quick and dirty, if I can do this. I want to drag and drop from this other old form here, which I called A, right? Be this thing the way it is, and go to this one and paste it, right? And that kind of, it does a couple things here when I do that. One, it keeps the name of my student, my data grid view. I should be able to go into properties, student list data grid view, so it doesn't get rid of it. That's number one. But I still need to do data binding, and I need to add a data. I need to add that in the bottom, right? So when I go to choose a data source, I'm going to point to a data source that already exists, which is in my project data source, this data set for students, right? So that creates that data binding stuff at the bottom. And I have this stuff, and I don't have anything modified, so it won't look as the way it was before, but who cares? And then just to fix it into my code behind file in my view code, and grab, right, which should be exactly the same. Copy. See if it is. And I need these two things first. Let's grab these things first. Copy. And in my student list, which is this one. Bear with me, guys. I'm sorry. I'm just fixing. I'm going to put those using statements in. And why do I need these two using statements? Because I need to access my models folder if I'm going to do something with the models that I've just imported, right? Diagnostics is if I want to do a debug.writeLine. Yes. Yes, because I have to, I'll put it up on GitHub. Give me 1 sec. Okay. It's going to be the exact same though. At the end of the day, there won't be any difference from what I'm doing. I'm just recreating it. Okay. So in my my load method, right? When I load it, I want to do all this. I'm going to copy this, and I have to create my load method. And the easiest way to do that is, of course, double click right on my student list form. Right. So there's my double click, right? And it does this student adapter fill. I'll leave that in there, but notice that that's what this is, right? But I'll just take the second one out. There we go. And I can get rid of this line because it's just a comment. Just make it nice and square like that. And let's see what else I put in there. Oh yeah, I did this one. Debug.writeLine. And then when I click on the cell, so I don't need that right now. I'll do that after, just for Gabe there. Okay, now that I've got that and I've got that table, we should be able to test it. So student list form and the design, and I have to make sure in my program.cs, let's get rid of this because I don't need this anymore, just because I don't want it to be any kind of corrupt files in my project, right? I want to go into my program.cs and make sure that it renders my student list form, which it does. Okay, I'll see if it can work. So this is just, I've just recreated that one part of my project really quickly. So it should render all this stuff. Now it doesn't do it right because remember I had modified some of these settings, but who cares for now? It does get the data for me, right, inside my data grid view. Okay, now what I want to do is in your assignment 4 is when I click on one of these items here, right? When I click on one of these items here, I want to transport myself into the it's going to first of all take a little text box down here. And whatever I've done here, it's going to select the row, and it's going to fill it into a box that goes down here. Now, for us, I'm not going to do all that work because there's work involved to do that. If I click on a row, whatever that row is, I want to take that data and I want to put it across to the details view immediately when I click in here. So how do I do that? Double click, right? So if I double click on one of these, sorry, go click away and double click back. I meant in design view. In design view, if I double click on this, I'm going to generate this thing that says cell content click. So if I click on a cell, any cell, I want to get the row index for that cell. And when I get that row index, whatever that is, I'm going to use that to build a new item in my model class, read from the database, right? This reads everything from the database. What I want to do is whatever I click here, I want to get the ID of the student that I'm getting, and I want to create that as a new object. And I want to take that object, right? This object that I'm creating, and I want to go to the form with it. Now, there's a couple things I could do. I could create an empty student object that I can play with and I can fill up, right? What does that mean? It means that even though I may not have anything kind of my properties defined for my object, I could go into my program.cs file in here and define a static object that's part of my my program. Remember how I did that last time? I've got to be in my program class, and I'm going to create something. First of all, I got to make my program class public and static, right? And same thing with my main. That's got to be public static if I'm going to share anything in main, right? But if I want to share an item, I could do something like this: public static, and I could make something called of type student. I'm going to call student. Now notice I can't access it because I don't have that using statement in here, but I could using COMP1004. This is all to answer your question, Gabe. Models, right? But it's good practice for you guys too, so it's okay. I can just type models. There we go. So now, object, and I'm going to make it equal to. I'm just going to define it right here inside of main. Right inside of main, I want to access this student. So public static student. I need to name it maybe student lowercase. Right. This creates a static object, but it doesn't have any value. There's no reference. It's just the shape of my object right now. But I haven't created a new object yet. This is just, I'm saying, hey, C#, reserve a little bit of space for something that's going to look like a student. Don't have a student yet for you, but put a little space aside. Also, is I can kind of access a student. If I say student, can I access student? I can, right? Because it's right here. This is what I refer to. Notice that I just have to put student in there. And if I say student is equal to a new student, I can do that, right? So here I define the variable, right? Student of type student. That's what it is. And here I'm creating the object. So here I create a public static object that I can use, that we can use throughout the application. Right? This is this object student. It's just a container class that I'm going to be using. Okay. Okay, but it's empty, right? Yes. About? That's correct. Well, no, it shouldn't delete your database. It shouldn't do that. But your local database only works for you. So if you kind of created another project from that, it may not connect properly to the local database the way it did before, although it should, right? Okay, I'll come back. I'll see me in the next break. Okay. Okay, so let's talk maybe by the end of class maybe. All right, so now that I've got this, I've got my student object. In my student list form, right? Here, this returns all students, right? I don't want to do it here. But here, I want to only make it so that it's one student that I'm returning, okay? And whatever I'm clicking on, I'm going to get an index of that type, right? So one of the things I know is that whatever I click on, I can get my E, which is my event target, right? That's what the E stands for. That's the event. I can get something called a column index as well as a row index. I don't care about the column index so much, right? But I do care about the row index. I want to be able to get the row index, right? And the row index says which row am I clicking on from 0 to whatever row it's going to be, right? So I want to get that student ID. That's what I really want to do, okay? And I just want to kind of figure this out for a second. All right, so, sorry, Gabe, you've kind of derailed me a little bit, but it's okay. So I know it's going to be an integer, right? My student ID is going to be an integer type, right? And I'm going to call it, let's say, we'll call it student ID for now, right? So we'll say student ID. And that'll be equal to the student ID that I'm going to get back from my students data grid view. All right, so I'm going to say students list data grid view rows, right? That's one way we can access. We can look at the rows of the student grid view, and we can say something like, I want to access the E dot row index. I want to put that in there. Oops. Try that again. E dot row index. Right? So I'm going to say, hey, look at the data grid, the data grid view, and I want to look at the rows array, because that's what it has. It has a rows array and it has a columns array in the student grid view, right? And in the rows array, look for this row index that I've just clicked on, whatever I've just clicked on. And then what I want to do is I want to say, then look at the cells, right? The cells array that have the student ID has to match exactly what the name of the student ID is, right? So example, that means this has to match in my Solution Explorer, in my map models, it has to match what's inside my student here. So notice the student ID is the one that I'm looking at. It has to match exactly this, right? So what I'm putting here, this student ID, this is the property that I'm looking at. So the student ID, so this is the cell that's representing the student ID, right? And I'm using dictionary format to do that. And I want to get the value, right, of that cell, right, with a capital V, I think it is. If I go probably outside this, and I can do it properly, value, okay? And I want to return that. Now, the problem that I'm getting when I do this is actually we're going to return an integer. But the problem, if you notice, is it's saying it's returning, if I go back to value, it's returning an object. And all I need to do is cast this object as an integer. And the best way to do that is to say convert to int32. So convert to int32, which is a standard integer. And I want to take this whole thing and wrap this whole thing in there. So now student ID is going to be an integer that I'm going to get back from my row. As a integer? No, it's better this way, especially when you want to specify what type you're getting, right? So, for example, if you have a long int, you cast it as a long, right? And there's different ways, but this is the best way to do it. You're going to get the best results this way. Convert to int32. Okay, so now I've got my student ID, whatever I'm clicking on. Let's prove that, all right? Let's prove that what that student ID is. And I'm going to do a debug dot write line, right? Here's my debug dot write line. And I want to kind of pump out my student ID, if I can, okay? And that should show up when I run my code. So this is get the student ID from the row that was clicked. That's what this is doing, okay? Once I've got the student ID from the row that was clicked, guess what I can do with it? I can do this. I can connect to the database again, and I can do another statement like this. But instead of returning everything, I'm going to return one. I'm only going to return the student ID that from the row that I want, right? Or I can grab all the rest of the information from the row if I want to as well. Okay. Now there's a problem here. Look. If I kept doing this over and over again, college context DB is equal to new college context over and over again, I'm going to be opening and closing connections, right? So what would be a better way to do it? Do you have any recommendations, anybody? Remember, this is just represents the connection to the database. What would you guys do differently? I know, you guys aren't interested. Okay, I'm going to start asking people. Mackenzie, what would you do differently? It's just because you're random, and I'm asking you. Oh, no, it's not a sexism thing at all, right? Come on. Girl in the class, tell me. You're the smartest person in the class. Go. Huh? Oh, now you've really debunked that. Okay. I could, but that means it has to be available like across my entire application. I don't want that. I only want it for this particular form. I like your thinking though. It's like what I want to do, but I really want to make this a class variable, and I'm going to define it as private because I don't want to share this outside of my form. So here in my class, I'm going to create it as a class. Oops. I'm going to create it as a class variable up here, right? So I'm going to say something like private, and we'll call this the same stuff I've got down here, right? With the copy that I'm going to cut this out, and up here, right? I'm going to put this in. So I'm going to kind of put this up here, right? So I'll put this private. Why? So now this DB, right? DB is available throughout my entire class. I don't have to do this more than once. That's what I meant, right? So that way, if I go down here, when I'm accessing db.students, that same database I can access here or everywhere else. I don't have to keep on doing that same line over and over again. If you really want to be explicit, you could say something like this. You could say this.db.students. Now, that's totally acceptable if you really wanted to do that. But we won't. We'll just leave it simply as db.students. Okay, So now that I have access to my database down here, right? Let's test it first of all to see if I'm getting if when I click on it, it actually generates the student ID. We have to do testing one step at a time. So I run it. I made a couple changes here. And if I click on this thing, it should generate, if I click anywhere, it should generate something. Now it does give me an error. It says unhandled exception of type system.argument exception occurred in my systems.windows.forms DLL. And if you want to know what it is, right? That's not what you look at. If you want to know what it is, you want to view detail, and it'll show you what the problem is. It says column name student ID cannot be found. Right? Column.student ID cannot be found. Right? Why is that? Yeah, but I haven't really done that, right? 100%. I'm showing the student ID, right? Like if I go back, but I'm looking for a column called student ID, right? So if I go back, stop. I mean, these are just debugging things, that we're trying to fix here. There's student ID right there, right? There's a column called student ID, right? If I was going to look at the data from my student ID, if I was going to edit columns, right? Here's my student ID column, right? Here's my data property name student ID. Again, you got to be very careful how it's spelled. It's got to be spelled exactly the same. Okay? But that's what you would do. My header text would be student ID, and my visibility in this case is true, right? But it is doing what I've asked it to do. Is it's looking at the student ID and returning it. Yes?
I figured if you replace it with a number, like 0.
Yeah. Oh, the number instead of so you're saying the first column.
Yeah.
Okay, but it should pick it up though. Like you're right, but it should pick it up. It shouldn't. I mean, I've done it before, so I know it should work theoretically. But yeah, you're saying is be explicit and put 0 in here, right? But this, I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything when I did if I did a cast. But I'm pretty sure that's how you do it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is how you would do it. This is exactly the code that I've used in the past, right? So let's just go with what you said just to fix this problem. So we're going to say row 0 is what we're looking at, or column 0. That's what this is doing, right? Cells 0, and if that's true, when I run it, and if I click here, it should tell me the numbers. That's 2, and that's 1, right? And that's 3. So I'm actually getting the student ID now, right? Which is good. Thank you for that. So here's my my student ID. So wherever I click on something, I'm getting the student ID. Now that I have the student ID, yes? Because it's the student ID that I'm reading. It's not the cell. I'm reading the student ID. Whatever is inside the value of the student ID, I'm reading that. And I'm getting it down here. Because I want to get this value. I don't care about the cell number now. The cell number is giving me that student ID. So cell number 0, for sure, right? But student ID is 1 in this case, because that's the value that's in here, okay? Okay, so that's number 1. Get the student ID and print it out. Now that I've got that, I can parse by student ID. I can do something like, whatever my selected student is, I can create that. I can say something like the selected student, right? So I'll say something like var selected student then is equal to, right, from my student in my db.student. I can still do the same thing, right? Where students, or what should I call it, student dot student ID is equal to student ID, right? Select student. That's just using link right there, right? And I need to use double equals, of course, Tom. And then I want to return first or default. Right? That's what I want to return. So what this does is it returns one result. I told you, you should probably put something like this at the end, because if I took this out, okay, I'm going to show you the data type, okay, when I do link. So here's link, and if I look over it, it says it's a select, the student is of type student. This is a student object. One student object is what I'm returning, right? Because I have this. But if I take this away, just to show you the difference, right, and I left it like this, right, without that, and I kind of put it over here, now I get something else. Now I get an iQueryable student. That's not what I want. I want to cast it. I want to use first or default. And I use first or default just in case, as an example, we don't find the student we're clicking on, which is unusual, it'd be impossible, but that solves a little bit of problems, okay? So selected student is now a student that I've got. Hey, if I get a student and I've just read it, right, I could do this. That's my selected student. Well, what's the other thing I could do, right? I got a temporary variable hanging out. It's like part of my application, right? Well, I could do something like this. Instead of this, var selected student, I could do something like program, it lets me type, program dot student. You can do that too, right? Because student, program dot student, I defined out here. This is my, my public static student container. That's going to be the running the student that I'm going to carry forward from one form to the other. It's a container, a data container. I don't have to create a temporary variable. I got one, right? So now that I got this, it's read all the details from my student, okay? So that's what this has done. As soon as I click on it, I fill this student up with the details from this information that I get from the database. Every time I click on a new one, it'll fill this student container up with whichever student I've clicked on. Okay? All right, that's number one. Two, this is what I want. This is the effect I want. When I click on a row, it takes me that information, saves it inside student, and then it takes me to the next form, which is the next form. Let's take a look at the next form. It's the student details form, right? So I want to hide this one and show the next one. That's kind of a real cheesy way to do it, but let's try this out. So I'll say something like this.hide. Oh, I hate when that happens. And then my student details.show, but I want to instantiate an object of type student details, right? Because I haven't done that yet. So let's do that. So I'll say student details, right? We'll say student details is equal to new student details. First I instantiate an object. I'm creating my object as I go, right? So this is create the next form, right? And once I've created the next form, I can show it, right? I can do this dot show. This is all review, by the way. We've done this many times. Well, several times. Okay, so this is hide and this is show. Okay, now once I show the form, guess what it's going to do? The form is going to read not from the database anymore, but it's going to take that temporary student data that I put in my student file and read it in there. That's the right thing to do, because why would I pull the database again? I wouldn't do that. I want to get the data that I clicked on inside my table and populate it into that other form, right? All right, let's take a look at that. So if I go to my student details form, here it is, right? And I got first name, last name. I'm missing some other data. What other things do I have that I can get? And these things are bound containers, no? Right? If I'm not wrong, let's take a look. No, maybe they're not. Maybe they're, if I look at the student details data here, yeah, I think I do this, which I don't want to do. I don't want to do this anymore. But I do want to do something else. I don't want to do this, first or default, or this. But I do want to do something like my first name textbox.text is something like this. But it won't be this. It'll be my program.student that I'm doing. So program.student.first name. And program.student.last name, right? That makes sense. And also, you know what, remember we did before? I want to be able to go back, right? And in order for me to go back, I need to know what my previous form was, which is going to be the student details, right? or student list form. So I'll say public student list form, right? We'll say, we'll call this previous form, right? I have to define that as a public variable, right? Now you could also make this a public property. For now, I'm just chinsing out and making it really quick, right? And when I create it in my student list form, right here, right? When I create this thing, I also want to populate this as the previous form. So I can say student details dot previous form. Oh, sorry. Student details dot previous form is equal to this, right? So I can go back. Right? That's why I've done this before. So create the form, you know, make a reference to this form, right? All the steps, hide this form, show the next form. And the next form is going to be my student details. And then show the next form, show the next form. Right? So this is going to do. When I click on this, it's going to show the next form. But I have a way back. I've created a path back. If I make a back button, it'll be able to close that form and open up the other one, the previous one before, right? If I do that. Okay, let's test what I have so far. This is all review. You guys have seen this stuff a couple times at least, right? And you've done it in your assignments a couple times. All right, so I click on something, bam, it opens it up and it's gone. Because I clicked away somehow. There it is. So John Smith, right? So whatever I clicked on John Smith, bam, it took me here right away. Let's just fix this up a little bit more, just to make it a little bit more, a little nicer. So again, I'm going to go into my student list form, the design side, and I want to see the properties. I want to start it off at the actual form itself. At the center, I want to do the same thing with my student details form. On the design side, I want to start this off in the center, not my default location. There we go. And I want to put a back button just because I'm a stickler for going back and forth all the time, right? I don't like staying in one place at a time. So to prove that I can save my data, right? Oops, common controls. And let's just drop in a button. I'm going to be on this side that says back, and we'll make it nice so it looks like everything else that looks on this form. So we'll say it's the citizens. There we go. And it'll be like, I don't know, 14 or something crazy like that. And we'll say that this is the back button. All regular stuff. We'll call this back. And we'll even program it by double clicking. Right? So when we press the back button, we're going to say this dot previous form dot show, right? And then this dot close. We're going to do that. So we're going to move from this one back to the previous one. All right, and we can test it now. Yeah.
This dot close destroys.
Who cares? Yes, but who cares? Because we've got it stored in program.student. Who cares if this data's been destroyed? That middle manager, which I talked about before, this part, if I go back to this, that data's in here, right? If I destroy this form, like I'm doing here, if I destroy this form, who cares? If I go back here, I still got my data right here in my class, right? Program.student. Student is the object, right? Okay, so let's try this out and see what happens. When I say class, I mean object. Okay, so I got this, and I want to click on the first one, and then I'm here. I click on myself, back. I click on John. John shows up, back. I click on Jane. Jane shows up, back. Mike. Mike shows up. It's just hidden, sorry. And then back, and then, I don't know, I'll click on that. Anything, anywhere I click, it does the same. What about if I click up here? What's going to happen? It's going to cause an exception, right? Why? Because I can't click up there. I'm clicking on a row, and what row is that I'm clicking on? I'm clicking on a row that has nothing to do, and there's no student assigned to it. So I should not be allowed to click on that row, right? So if my row index, right, is -1, I think is what it is, right? I think that's what they do it. So I can test for that. And I want to do that. I want to say if my my row index, because that will cause a problem. Does everyone understand that? Okay, so let's go back to student list form for a second. So here's my student list form. So whenever I click on something, I'm going to go to the next form, right? But it's based on the row that I'm clicking. What if I click on the header row? It's going to error out. That's still a row. It's a valid row, right? The header row has no student ID details. There's a student ID, but there's no value there, right? So how do I say that as long as it's not the header row? Well, you can do that by doing something like this. You can say if e.row index, right, is not equal to -1. I'm sorry, but this is how it's done, right? That's the first check we have to make, right? We have to put all this stuff inside there. I'm just going to take this last part here and put it down here, right? Put all this inside of there, right? And the reason for that is because if I click on the top row, right, and it's going to try and take me somewhere where I can't. So I got to check for that. Data grid view 101, yeah. -1 means it's the header row, right? Because it's not the row that's inside my table. It's outside of the row, and the way. Correct. And the outside of my table in the first row you're talking about, not column. The first row, right? So if I show you, it's better. So this row here, right? That's 0. This row is -1. That's how Microsoft used it for data grid view. Same thing with column though. If I click on this column, right? That's column 0. This column is column -1. Okay? If there was a reason for clicking. Now what if I click here? Is that going to have a problem? Well, nothing happens here. What it does though is it highlights everything, similar to what I've been asking you to do. But I want you to do this in your assignment number 4 when you click this, right? Now, this isn't the effect that I want assignment number 4 to work like. There's another button that says order, right? And there's another place that's going to take the data that I've got from my row and put it inside that box. But I just showed you how to do that, right? Because I'm reading the row, right? All I'm doing is reading the data from the row, and I'm populating it in there. You get it? Yes, we have a solution, right? Sorry?
We hit it last class.
Did you?
Yeah. So like you told us to make it not visible, so I think that might be.
Maybe. But the way we figured this out is if we go to the code, right, is just to add in, instead of student ID, we just put in cell 0.
Yeah, but like in the column like options.
Yes. Oh, but it doesn't matter if it's visible. If it's not visible, it should still be there. Right? I mean, I didn't delete it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The previous one.
Let's go back.
No, just this. The previous one.
Oh, well, in my student previous for, so student details, up here, you mean? First, you got to do this. You got to define a public property of type student list form, right? Student list form refers to the previous form. Did you fix it? Yeah. That refers to the previous form, right? Like this is what we've done over and over again. We've done this before, where we go back and forth, right? Yeah. All right. So all we've done here is we've taken 2 properties of my object. So if I go back here and if I look at models under students, I have student ID, I have first name, I have last name, I have program, and I have program description. I can put those in there too in the form, right? My student details. And all I'm doing here is I'm reading the data from my form. That's all I'm doing when I'm getting into my student details. So if I add a couple of more of these things, so if I kind of grab one of these and I copy and paste, and this will be the program, so I can say this label, right, is the program label. And this right here is the program text box. I can do that. I've got, and this shouldn't be last name. It should just say it should say program. Okay. The American way. And now, what about my program details? I don't have anything like that. So it would be a box that goes down here somewhere. For now, let's just leave these ones, right? Just to show you, I can add another one in there. So Gabe, right? I'm in my student details. I want to also populate my this box right here, which is my program text box, right? What do I do here? Okay. What do I do here? What do I put in here? Thank you. Program text box dot text. Very good. Program. Right? Sorry, it's weird that we're using program, but that's what it is. That's the name. So all we're doing is reading from our this object we've created, and every time we go back and forth, we're just writing to it. Okay. So if I try it again, just to show you guys. So here's this ugly table. I go here, bam. I also got computer science, right? And it's something that's coming from the database. Back, I click on Mike Booth, and now he's fine arts. Sorry, to bring him back in there. As long as I keep clicking back and forth, right? You can see that it's gonna choose whichever one I decide. These, they're not read-only. I can certainly type them, but it would make sense. Would it make sense? It depends on what I'm using my student details for. If I'm just using it as a read, then I'd want my student details to be read-only. Okay, how would I affect that change? It depends on what I'm doing, right? If I'm clicking there and I want this stuff to be read-only, I could program it, like actually design it that way. But what if I want to use my student details form to edit? Then I wouldn't want to make those read-only anymore. So it depends on what's the most common use. It won't matter. Nothing will change if I do this. Yeah. Unless I'm editing, right? Okay, so how do I do that? So again, what's the most common use? Chances are if I'm deleting or if I'm reading, right? Those are the two common uses. And then the other one is editing. There's two that I'm just reading, and only one that I'm actually changing. So this should be designed this way, read only, right? And then only when I'm editing should I go in there and make it read write. Okay, that's how it should be, because most cases, 2 of the 3 cases are only read-only cases. Therefore, I should make it, by design standards, read-only. So that means, to go with what you just said, if I go to student details.design, these 3 boxes should be read-only, right? So if I go back here and I say read-only instead of false is true. Now, it does change the style of my box, and of course, I want to make it so that the background color, the back color, is actually equivalent to white, if that makes sense. So it looks a little different. And I probably want to change my my border style to Finch single, just to make it look a little flatter.
From a standard, like a design standpoint,
yeah,
functionality standpoint, should those also have a tab stop of false?
Oh, yeah, you could, but then, yes, I understand what you're saying. So So if I tab in there, it's just going to take me to the back button.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's probably a good practice as well, right? Because if I go to tab stop, they're all true right now. So that means if I can tab into them. But however, if I go to editing, I got to turn that back on, right? Just like I would with everything else, right? So tab stop. If I go tab stop false.
Would it not make sense if you're editing then to create a separate form where you can just go straight to edit and then?
But why? It's the exact same. It'll look exactly the same as this, except with an edit, but with a submit button.
I would see the difference being that at least you don't have to keep going back and forth, making everything true and whatnot. And
2 seconds though. I mean, really from a code perspective, right? Otherwise I have to create a whole new class. Think about from the weight of the thing, right?
Yeah.
What's more weighty? A whole new class, which is a whole form that's empty except for that one change, or yeah. So that's why I would do all in one myself. Okay, let's. I mean, again, I think that you can make different design decisions for sure. So if I click on Smith, then I can see this computer science, right? And notice now that there's if I click tab, I can't really click tab. It just goes to my back button, right? And I can't change anything, but I can click in there. If I don't want to click in there, what do I need to do? Because I can still highlight, right? If I don't want to be able to highlight, I need to disable too. That's the other thing I need to do, right? So not only do I make it read only, but I also disable them, right?
how do you disable so that you can't click in there?
Disable. So if I say enable, right? All these forms are enabled is equal to true. I can make enabled is equal to false. Right now it's going to be not only are they read only, but I can't click on them at all. Right? See? I can't highlight them or anything. They're completely locked. Right? Questions with this stuff? I think this stuff we covered before, but I wanted to show you the link. How do we use that, our query language to go back and forth? Okay, I think I want to stop at this point right now when it comes to this stuff, because I need to talk about entity framework a little bit, right? Because we talked about link at length. And by the way, your PowerPoints are up there, right? But I want to talk about entity framework because you need to understand what the hell I'm doing with entity framework, right? So thank you for that, Gabe. At least it clarified that piece, I think. All right, so, whoa, ugly diagram. Let's just get rid of it. So we really were talking about link and this stuff. And I think the rest of this document, the great thing about it, it gives you other examples of how to do queries, which is really cool. And I want you to remember this because, like I said, it's not just useful here. It's also useful for COMP 2007. So the next course you're going to do in the summertime, right? I know it's a couple of semesters away, but the great thing is you're going to be doing this again and again, right? If you haven't done this, if you haven't done that course already. And again, it just gives you some examples of ascending or descending order, and it goes into a lot of details about how to do that. But the other thing I want to talk about today is a little bit about the entity framework and what is that, right? Because we use entity framework, but I haven't really described what it is. So really what it is like it says here, an object relational mapper, right? And what it does is it maps the entity, right? The entity being the database itself, right? And each of its tables, each of its entity properties, if you will, right? So tables, as well as code. You can also build in its own functionality. Databases can have their own functions, right? It maps all that out. It creates a mapping between the table and your Visual Studio project. That's what it does. So why? Because we make this format, this framework, we're using it because the development time is reduced. ADO.NET, it takes a long time to use ADO.NET, standard ways of accessing database with standard query language that you would see all over and over again, right? Why would we use that when you can something a much easier shorthand? By the way, the link that I showed you today can also be done as methods. So you don't have to do where the way we did it. We could say something like this. I could say .where, right? Where is a method as opposed to where as part of that clause. So there's different expression types for link. We're going to talk about the other expression types later on as we get into more database stuff. The one I showed you right now is just the standard query type. Okay. So this is what it would look like. Right? Here's my application, right? Here's my database way over here. ADO.NET, we still use ADO.NET, but it's been wrapped, by the Entity Framework. Entity Framework wraps around ADO.NET so that it communicates properly with it. So I don't have to use ADO.NET directly, which is a lower level way of doing it. I can use Entity Framework, which makes it a lot easier. That's what it's for. So that query statement that I'm using is an easier way of me connecting to the database. If you still want to use ADO.NET, though, you still could, and you can mix and match if you really need to, right? But for most cases, you won't need to. Okay, there's different approaches we talked about last time, right? Database first approach, code first approach, model first approach, and code first from database, which is the one we use, right? Database first approach. It's perfect for a database that exists where you want to see the model of what it looks like, okay? And if I was going to create a connection for you and to show you what it looks like, if I did a database first approach, right, with the Entity Framework, it would look something like this. So let's say, for example, I'm in my Solution Explorer, and let us create another, instead of a college context with students, right? I want to create another thing. So what other thing can we create? Instead of a college context, maybe we're going to make some kind of buildings that we have at the college, right? A building context. We have different kind of, we have the athletics building in the college. We have, I don't know, building A, building B, building C, building D, right? Those different kinds of buildings, right? And each building itself is a different type, let's say. You could call it that, a building context or something else, where you have a buildings table, all right? And the buildings might have the building name, the location, the description, and a bunch of other stuff. How do we build that? First of all, if I go to my SQL Server Object Explorer, right, I can look at the table that I've created inside my database in local DB. Remember, local DB is only your local database. I have no access to it. No one else does either. If you want to have everyone access to it, you need to connect this to Azure or some kind of database that's available to you on the internet. Okay, so here's COMP1004 here, right? And inside this database, so this is the database server. This is one database in the database server. And when I look at tables, I can see that I have dbo.students, okay? So I want to do the same thing. I want to connect to another set of tables, right? And I don't have that table, but I want to create it. Let's make a new table. We'll call it the buildings table. Bear with me while we do this. So add new table, right? It's going to go to table designer here. I want to call this the table ID, so the building ID, right? I just wanted to show you what it looks like to map it with the object relational mapper and the EDMX diagram, right? I'm not going to allow nulls. In here, remember, I want to make this a auto-incrementing primary key. So I'm going to change my identity to true. That's what I'm going to change here. Again, it updates the T-SQL script down here automatically for us. And then in here, I want to make this the building name. You could also just leave it as name and ID and so on. I think building name might be just a little bit more descriptive. What type is the building name? We're going to make it nvarchar50, let's say. Okay, and I'm not going to allow nulls for this one. You have to have a building name, yes. Right-click on tables inside your database, add new table. Okay, and then let's say we'll call it a building location. So building, actually let's call it location. How about that? Just to make it easy. And the location might be pretty large too, so we'll say nvarchar50 for that too. And the allow nulls is no, you need that too. So I won't allow nulls for these three things. And that's all I have. So the name, the ID, and the location. That's it. All right, just to make it simple, a simple example, right? Okay, so this is my database table. I'm going to click update to update the database. And click update database. Now what this does is it creates another table for me in my database. Now I have two. I have, oh, and I called it student. Oh man, what the hell? I need to update this. I can't call it table. I got to call it building. So my buildings table. Right, so I'm modifying it here, and I'm updating the table, and I'm going to go update database. There we go. Now it's going to update this to buildings. And of course, I just added another one. We'll just delete this one. Delete. Okay, so so I've added my buildings table, and I'm just going to kind of go over here to show you what it looks like. I don't need any of these right now. This is just for demo purposes that I'm doing this while we're wrapping up the class. So if you notice, here's DBO buildings, here's DBO students. DBO buildings doesn't have any data. Let's add some data by going to view data, right-clicking on DBO buildings, and clicking on view data. And we'll add some building data in here. So my building ID is going to be automatic. My name, we'll call this the first building. This is, I don't know, 1 First Street. And we'll say this is the second building. Not a lot of thought here. And this is 2 First Street. What that? What's the problem? Okay, I'll come back to you after, right, for this, because that needs a little bit more work. All right, so I got a couple of items. Let's add one more just to make it different. The third building. And this time we'll make it a little different. We'll say 1 3rd Street. There we go. Whatever. All right, so a couple of different things here. And we've got a little bit of data that we've got in here into our buildings and students. Now I want to make a connection to my database, and I want to create a new context. And I want to use the database first approach, right? And we kind of showed you the database first with code first approach, right? Code first with database. This time I'm going to use the database first approach to show you the difference. I'm going to right click on models. We'll click add. And I'm going to click new item. Sorry, my voice is cracking here. Go to data. I'm going to click ADO.NET Entity Data Model, right? That's how I did it last time. And instead of model, I'm going to choose the building context. Because that's what I called it. I called it the building. I mean, I only have one table. It's called buildings, right? But I still need to have a context for the table, even if there's only one. Okay? Click add. It's going to ask me what kind do I want. Last time I did this one. Now, this time I'm going to do this one, just to show you the difference. Click next. I chose the entity data model, top one. Got the top one? You're going to go to add, new item, data on the left, and then the top is ADO.NET Entity Data Model, and you're going to change the name to building context. Okay, and then click add. When you do that, you have a choice of what to do, and I want you to choose this left one for the first time, right? Now click next. It's going to ask you for the connection. Okay, I've got my college context data set connection, all right? I don't want that one. And the other two I have in here, I have other connection strings as well. I want to make a new one. Let's make a new connection. Now it's important to know when I make a new connection, right? It's important to understand what the server name is. And remember what it is. It's open bracket, local DB, backslash, MS capitals, SQL, local DB, like this. For most of us, some people have another version. Okay, I'm using Windows authentication, and I'm pulling down the database that I want. All right, and my database is going to be the same database, 1004. Right? I'm not changing databases. I'm making a connection for a different table. Now I'm going to click OK. What's that? Okay. Well, not data. No, you have to put the database names in there for you, right? It should be. So did you make the right? Did you put the right server name? Local DB, MS SQL, local DB. Local DB with capital L. Okay, I have to come back to you. So COMP1004 entities, instead of COMP1004 entities, I'm going to call this buildings connection. So we're connecting just to the buildings table, right? And it's going to add this into app config. Now we're going to have 3 connections, one for our data set, one for our student, and one for our buildings. And I can have as many as I want. It's not going to hurt anything, right? So I'm going to click next. Now it's going to show me my tables in this connection. I can see both tables, but I don't care about this one. I only care about this one, right? This is going to be my buildings, and this, instead of COMP1004 model, my namespace, right? I don't want that as a namespace. I want to call this buildings model. Now this is a little different than what we did with code first from database. I didn't have that option at all, right? So I'm going to call this the buildings model, all right? And then click finish. Now when I do this, it's not going to just pull the database. It's going to check to see if I have entity framework, which I already do, right? And then it's going to create a new structure inside my models folder called buildings context. You're going to see it in a second. It's totally different. And an EDMX diagram, which is actually going to show me what my model looks like physically, like this. That's what I get when I use database first. I have a diagram. And if I had multiple tables with different relationships, I would see the relationships here. In fact, that's what I get, a relationship diagram, right? But for the most part, for us, how useful is that? Not very useful, and that's why it's being deprecated, right? But if you want to see the relationships between, especially if it's a very complex database, this might help you because it's visual. So you can see what the relationships are between databases or between tables. This is only one table, so it doesn't really help us in this case. Now, here's the other thing. I can close this down now. Here's the other thing. If you look at my building context, it actually creates another structure. So take a look. So here's my other stuff that I created earlier, right? Well, look at all this. This is all the other stuff it creates to create that diagram. So it creates a building context EDMX diagram. And inside that, it has my building context context. And inside that, it has my building context context CS, which is this, right? And then underneath that, it has the actual diagram itself, right? When in XML format. And then it finally gets to my building.cs, which is my model. This is my building.cs, my model that I built that's related to my table. Wow, lots of work and lots of extra stuff that I don't need, right? So all I really wanted was this, right? And that's why it's being deprecated. But great when it comes to databases that are already in existence, right? It's fantastic for that because it maps them out. Okay, code first approach. I'm not going to do that one, but that's if we didn't have a database at all, and I create my code first. I create my classes by hand. So I go through there and I create my properties and everything else by hand, and then the database gets created from my class. So I create my model, my database gets created from my class. Wonderful, right? So that's a really modern way of doing things, and that's if I'm creating a brand new site, I may want to go this way. Chances are, though, I'll be honest with you, from my experience and how I do it, I create the database first all the time. It's just far easier because it's way harder to map my class by hand than to get my database to do it for me, right? Why am I going to do something that I could get something else to do for me? It's much more, from a rapid application perspective, I'd rather do the database first approach all the time, right? And of course, the final approach, or the other one, is the model first approach, which I don't have a class and I don't have a database. I do my EDMX diagram by itself, right? And then create my relationships, and it creates my tables as well as my database. That's not a bad approach if you're if you're more of a database administrator and you're mapping it out, the relationships and the business processes between different tables. It might be a good thing to map them out because it can map one-to-one, you know, when you create your relationships. Of course, the one we used was the code first from database approach, which I recommend. Okay, so I've got them all in here, and I wanted to explain a little bit more about entity framework so that you're like, okay, what the hell is entity framework, right? And I wanted to show you the different approaches so that you're kind of clear on what they all are. Any questions around today? We talked kind of high level about LINQ, right, which is it's a language for querying a database or any other data source, any kind of list, any collection. we can use a link to query, right? As well as the entity framework, which you're going to see more and more as we go forward. Okay, that's it really for me for this week. Remember that Friday, that's tomorrow midnight, finally, assignment 3 will be due again, right? And for those people who did it already, thank you very much. Those people who are just finishing it up now, just make sure that you go through it and go through my requirements. I've seen some. I've been going through some of the submissions, and I've seen some that you've missed simple things like comments, like internal documentation. Internal documentation is worth 5 points, and sometimes your whole assignment's worth 55 points. That's like 10% of your assignment is internal documentation, putting in your name and doing a few comments inside your code. So if you've missed that, please don't miss that for this assignment, for assignment 3, okay? And then GitHub. Some people use GitHub as a last resort. They just push it up on GitHub, and they don't use GitHub on a regular basis. They don't use GitHub while they're developing their code. They use GitHub as the last thing they do. Oh yeah, let's put it up on GitHub too. You only get 2 points for that. You get 4 points if you actually work with GitHub the entire time, right? So those are 2 things I can comment on that are common with a lot of people. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I'll see you next week.